Well, hey, and welcome to Cleantech and Coffee episode 9, where Timo comes out of the closet and talks about his love of carbon taxes. I happen to also be a believer of taxing the bad and not the good. And we have that in common with Leonardo DiCaprio. If you've seen the movie Before the Flood, they talk a lot about carbon taxes and the shift from taxing the good to actually taxing the bad. Timo will tell you a lot about this. He knows a lot about it, so we sent Joshua, our communications advisor, over to Helsinki to interview him. Check this out.
Okay, yeah, thanks for throwing over to us here in sunny Helsinki, Bigge. Winter has arrived. I'm here with Timo, and we're going to talk about carbon taxes. Don't be alarmed, viewer. This is okay. So, Timo, there's been a lot of talk about carbon taxes, most notably in Leonardo DiCaprio's film Before the Flood, as well as the news from the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Initiating a carbon tax or a discussion of a carbon tax over there. What are your thoughts on a big bad carbon tax?
All right, so of course the thing that has been happening in the past decade or so is that we have had carbon trading schemes all over the world trying to tackle this CO2 issue. But I'm like a very, very firm believer in carbon taxes. I think it would be in many ways a much better way of dealing with carbon dioxide reduction. So the first reason is that if you're gonna have an impact in industry, how corporations are going to react to regulation, you have to have a regulation that the companies can trust and that they will have a clear view of what the price will be in the future. If you have a tax, you have a fixed set price. It may be changed from time to time, of course, but you can just incorporate that into all of your investment calculations. Whereas if you have a carbon trading scheme, the emission price allowance might vary, and it actually does not have that same kind of impact as a carbon tax would be.
So this would be much like the factoring in of the VAT that many businesses make with prices, right? It's a fixed tax.
Sure.
People know what they're going to get.
That's right. And typically this kind of a carbon tax that would be then embedded in prices of electricity and materials, for example. So that would just guide all production into the direction we want to go to. And here's another thing about carbon taxes. It doesn't have to be additional to current taxes. It can replace current taxes. Why tax labor and other things that are beneficial for society when you can tax things that are not beneficial, such as burning coal or maybe sugar in food? It would be a smart idea to just tax those heavily and at the same time ease taxation on the beneficial things.
So what you're talking about is a tax shift rather than a tax increase.
That's exactly right.
Okay, that's probably an important thing for people to understand. Usually I think people get the wrong idea when politicians or other lobbyists for a carbon tax, they talk about it in isolation.
That's true, but the idea is that it would be good to tax the right things, and I think there's many governments that are pretty quickly going towards that direction actually right now. And it's one way to deal with. After the Paris Treaty, we are finding different kinds of ways for governments to go towards that direction, and I think many governments will find taxation as a better tool than carbon trading.
And so bringing it closer to home here in Helsinki, or in the Nordics a bit more specifically, does a carbon tax factor into decisions or into the economy here, do you think? Is there a benefit to having one, or do you think that other policies are making good headway?
Well, having some kind of price on CO2, I do think that it is crucial. Currently, renewables, for example, and clean technologies are already really cost competitive, and the transition is happening really quickly already. But we still have a lot of old coal-fired power plants, for example, in the world. And in order for us to phase those out, in order to transition completely from fossil fuels to clean energy, there needs to be this additional push from the government, essentially banning in the long term burning coal for energy.
Right. Controversial topic in these parts at the moment. I'm sure we'll have something to say on that otherwise. I know that Cleantech Invest it states quite clearly that the portfolio doesn't rely on government subsidies or incentives for them to be cost competitive. But are there examples of how some of our portfolio companies might benefit from such legislation being passed in different markets?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We have clearly focused on companies that are not reliant on any kind of government subsidies. A good example of that is Energize, which is saving energy costs in the industry, and the amount of savings Energize can come up with for a customer, it is just such a cost competitive solution that having an additional carbon price at the factory level, of course that would improve the offering still a bit, but it's not really necessary because it's so competitive already. And the same applies for most of our companies. There are, let's say, Norcard doing renewable energy in Africa and Asia. In those countries, it's incredibly competitive already to use, for example, solar, waste to energy, and batteries instead of diesel. So there, you don't really need to have this kind of additional cost component. But maybe in EU, for example, we could see more of distributed and renewable energy being implemented with better, like higher carbon price or carbon taxes in different governments.
Okay.
So, but we do have some companies, for example, Aurelia Turbines and Eagle Filters, which are related to gas-fired turbines. And there, for example, in EU, currently with the low carbon price, gas hasn't been used a lot for the past few years. And if the price would be at a correct level, much higher, then there would be a lot of more demand for utilizing gas for power production instead of coal.
So you just mentioned something real quick I'll pick up on. You said if the price of electricity, I'm guessing, would be the right price. What do you exactly mean by that? How much should electricity cost in your opinion?
Well, that's interesting. My personal opinion, I think fossil-powered electricity should cost at least 5 times what it's costing right now, but that's like on a philosophical level. If you would include all the costs related to burning coal, all the health and all the climate change costs, if you would embed those in the electricity price, yes, it would be definitely a lot more higher, but that will of course never happen. And also if that were so, of course then we would have only solar and batteries doing the job for us, because then nobody would ever burn coal again.
There you go, viewer. We just got Timo here to talk about carbon pricing, carbon taxes, the cost of electricity, his philosophical idea of how much it could cost. But don't worry, it won't be 5 times more expensive. So thank you, Timo, and back to you, Big Air.
Well, thanks for that. Obviously, Timo and Leo DiCaprio both like carbon taxes, so we'll have to get them together for a espresso on that topic pretty soon. Thanks a lot, Joshua, for going there and interviewing Timo, and talk to you soon again. Bye.